And welcome back. It's Linda Moulton Howe back with us. Linda, you have really done an incredible job getting these incredible stories. You always do, but these fascinate me. I used to go to Windsor all the time as a kid.
Well, and you missed, apparently, the Windsor rumbling hum because it didn't start until 2011, and that's the mystery. When you were going there as a kid, nobody had ever heard about the Windsor hum. But on, let's say, since 2011, I've done several reports about these strange sounds that have included the Windsor hum, and it was only 2 weeks ago, on Sunday, June 12th, that's this year, 2016, a Facebook page for Windsor hum and rumble haters suddenly filled up with reports and complaints. One person said, I have never heard it like that in 6 years that I have been recording. A lot of people are recording this sound. Never have I ever heard it like that. And this was Mike Provost. He lives in the west side of Windsor, Ontario, about 7 miles northeast of a place called Zug Island in Michigan. It's the corporation home of U.S. Steel, and the source, say engineers, of the irritating low rumbling that has been keeping many residents awake in the city of 210,000 since at least 2011. Now, Earth Files first reported about the Windsor hum on September 30th, 2011, the day after there was a large public meeting that was held in South Windsor in the arena there. Canada's Ministry of Environment had received some 400 complaints about this persistent rumbling sound. And so officials with the Provincial Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources Canada joined a consultant they had hired by the city of River Rouge, in which Zug Island exists. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to tell the nearly 200 residents that, quote, the source of the Windsor hum is an airborne sound wave originating from the general vicinity of Zug Island in River Rouge, Michigan, across the Detroit River on the United States side of the border, close quote. Well, now, Zug Island is about 1 square mile of land along the Detroit River that in the early 1920s, Henry Ford dug a canal around it wide enough to allow large ships to pick up and take Ford cars to various ports and auto dealers. And over the 20th century, Zug Island became increasingly industrialized with iron and steel works for car manufacturing and other big factory needs. One side benefit evolved from the surrounding canal. The island became off limits to the public and its security level increased. By 2003, one American steel company there went broke, and another bought it. That's when United States Steel purchased National Steel Corp. Today, a few hundred people work on Zug Island, including hourly workers at U.S. Steel, who are members of the United Steelworkers Local 1299. And during the 2008 global financial meltdown, even U.S. Steel had to halt production but turned on steel production again a year later in the fall of 2009. So it was only 2 years later, after that, when government officials and engineers began trying to solve all of these resident complaints in Windsor on the Canada side of what people kept saying was this weird hum, and others said it was rumbling. And that was when they had this meeting and the local city councilor announced to the audience, quote, this issue has made its way to the governor of Michigan's office. But, strangely, nothing has stopped or reduced the irritating noise coming from Zug Island. That's not a mystery, the location. What is a mystery is, why haven't all the complaints caused some adjustment, and why is there no resolution? Well, I took I took that question to Colin Novak, Ph.D. He's an associate professor of mechanical, automotive, and materials engineering at the University of Windsor. And he studies acoustics, vibrations, and psychoacoustics. 3 years ago, in 2013, Professor Novak joined the Windsor Hum investigation, and he used sound level meters, pentagular array cameras, microphones to try to precisely identify the sound source in order for Canadian authorities to ask the perpetrator of whoever it would be in this research to fix or seriously dampen the noise. Professor Novak has hard data showing that the irritating sound averages the extremely low frequency of 35 hertz, and he has traced that 35 hertz signal right to Zug Island and what he thinks are the furnaces of U.S. Steel. He has even heard the sound rattling his own windows several times. Here now, from the University of Windsor in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, is Professor Colin Novak.
The way I describe it, when I'm inside a building, and I've usually been inside the building when I've heard it, it sounds like a very large diesel engine, whether it be a truck or more like a train locomotive, parked outside your house, sitting there idling and causing the windows and the doors to rattle or to shake. It's somewhat disturbing because it makes everything shake and rattle. And you say, well, why would that be happening? It's just not natural.
Right. And is the rattling of the windows in the houses because the amplification of the 35 hertz is so big?
Yeah, because of the amplitude of the 35 hertz sound is so large. It's an airborne excitation that's transferred into structure-borne excitation.
Is there a cycle to it?
Yeah, it tends to happen more in the nighttime, early mornings. I've heard the hum myself, maybe around 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. We measured it and heard it several times around 11 o'clock in the evening.
Okay, is there a cycle in the frequency and the duration at night?
No real change in the frequency. The duration does vary. I heard and measured it for as little as 10, 15 seconds. Sometimes it's gone on for minutes. I've heard people report that it's been continuous for hours on end.
And the 35 hertz seems to continue and be pretty consistent no matter what the duration or time.
Yeah, there are a lot of industrial sources that can produce noise at 35 hertz. What makes this one unique is the amplitude of the energy, simply by the fact that the sound is being heard more than 10 kilometers away from the identified area of the source. That tells you that the energy is enormous. And there's very, very few industrial-type processes that can produce that amount of energy at such a low frequency. So that really eliminates a lot of potential sources that can make noise at that low frequency.
Well, I'm looking at The Guardian of June 7th, 2016, and it is saying that you have been able to link the hum to the U.S. Steel plant and a Coke battery owned by the local utility company on Zug Island that is on the U.S. side, correct?
We've surmised that the source of the noise is actually the blast furnaces at the U.S. Steel facility.
How did you do that?
Well, we looked at all of the different sources of noise that are located on the island. That is really the only potential source of noise that can produce frequencies that low at that great of an amplitude. It requires an enormous amount of energy to be able to do that. And blast furnaces are something that can be a little finicky at times. And what we are assuming is that the producer is making a custom product in small limited batches, which is why the sound is being produced for only short periods of time. Then it seems to disappear, sometimes a couple of years, and then it seems to come back again for several months at various intensities. Then it goes away again. We're right now experiencing probably the third phase of the Windsor hum over the last almost 6 years.
Right. You were saying that it's possible that U.S. Steel is making some sort of special object that could be producing this higher amplitude. Could you explain that more?
Steel manufacturers can make steels with different properties. And this is an assumption based on some information that has been given to us from various people that are involved within the industry. They may be either developing or producing small batches of a particular steel with properties for a customer. If it were a special steel, it would explain why they're having to maybe tweak their operating system beyond its capabilities, because their blast furnace is extremely old. That facility has been there for approximately 100 years. So it can be the case just extending what those capabilities are and producing a certain steel, maybe a certain hardness. Maybe they have to go to a more extreme temperature in the blast furnace then, or introduce more air than would normally be required, and that could result in some of these sounds being produced.
Any examples, such as military objects?
That certainly could be the case. I don't have any facts to suggest that they are making product for the military, but there's certainly also manufacturers of military equipment and vehicles in Michigan, so it's a possibility.
What is puzzling, Professor Novak, is that Windsor is a city of 210,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
It's right across the river from Zug Island in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
The United States and Canada have been allies for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a complaint by that city for at least 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I am puzzled about why there could not be some resolution.
Yeah, I share those feelings with you. The phenomena is certainly experienced by a great many people in Windsor. Not everybody in Windsor hears it, only in certain areas, but I would stick my neck out to say that at some point in time, there'd certainly be probably tens of thousands of people who have experienced the hum. It seems to be that the people closest to the island in West Windsor and LaSalle seem to be most bothered by the hum. But why? The only thing I can assume, perhaps, is because if it is indeed U.S. Steel, it's a private corporation, it's a for-profit company, and they simply don't want to allow access, or they don't want to cooperate with an investigation. And quite frankly, I don't know what authority or power any level of U.S. government would have over that company, especially considering that there does not seem to be any complaints or noted adverse effect by U.S. citizens.
Because it's largely an industrial area on the U.S. side?
Yeah, exactly. And also the facility's right on the water, and noise will travel very easily and efficiently across water. So the city of Windsor has essentially an unobstructed acoustic view of the island. That wouldn't really be the case on the U.S. side, because between the island and any densely populated residential areas, we have very large industrial buffer zone. And within that buffer zone, there are many different sources of industrial noise. And I think the propagation of this type of noise is drowned out by all the other activity.
I wonder what would happen if the territories were reversed and the hum were coming from Windsor and the United States was complaining.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I don't know.
Do you know if the Prime Minister of Canada has contacted President Barack Obama's administration in the last 6 years?
I don't know all of the details of that. I know representatives of the Canadian government have tried to work with various levels of government on the U.S. side. I've attended meetings at the Canadian consulate in Detroit. We have met with representatives of the town as well.
Do you remember if there is any specific United States senator or representative who was in those meetings who wanted to come to some sort of a resolution with the city of Windsor?
There were not any at any meetings that I took part in.
Why do you think that the Canadian government can't get a resolution on this?
I really don't know. If the source were located, potentially it could be very expensive to fix. And then maybe a private company doesn't want to invest the money to to fix.
What about military priorities that are highly sensitive in the Department of Defense and depending upon U.S. Steel in Zug Island to produce something for the United States DoD, and that any inquiry into what's happening at U.S. Steel could open up that sensitivity?
Yeah, I guess that could be a possibility as well, although I don't have any evidence of that, but it's certainly not outside the realm of a possibility. We really need to get closer to the source. What I would like to do is put some monitors, if we can't get onto the island, put monitors closer to the island on the U.S. side, and that would really only require the cooperation of River Rouge. And in the last meeting that I was at, there was a representative from River Rouge.
In the U.S. Steel replies to your government, what do they say is the reason that they won't communicate?
They don't give us any reason. I understand. They simply say they have no comment. The town, River Rouge, in which U.S. Steel is located, they've also been contacted. And the short of it is we've been told that they have no interest in pursuing the matter any further since the hum does not seem to affect anyone on the U.S. side. Given that, though, you have to keep in mind that this area is highly industrialized and there aren't a lot of residential areas that can be affected. But because people on the U.S. side aren't being bothered from it, they have no interest or motivation in pursuing the matter any further.
Baffling for people, Linda.
Well, George, isn't it peculiar that between the United States and Canada, as long as we have been friendly allies, that something like this going on for 5 years with more than one focus on U.S. Steel in Zug Island, that there wouldn't be a resolution. And that's why I ask him those questions. My own suspicion would be that U.S. Steel is manufacturing something that takes higher temperatures, is producing that huge amplification, and it probably is for the Department of Defense, and it would explain why that U.S. Steel isn't responding to any of the inquiries from the Canadian side, because perhaps they've been compromised with some sort of non-disclosure agreement. This is speculation on my part, but it is the best one can come up with. When it's 5 years, those people really are complaining about something that seems legitimately disturbing, and I just want to go again to 2 weeks ago, Sunday, June 12th, that the sudden increase in the noise and going to Facebook didn't occur just at night. This was very interesting. There was a guy living in Windsor. He's a drummer, and he said that he was waked up by a long, now this is interesting, long, drawn-out, low-frequency hum for the first time in more than a year, and it was 4 a.m. on Monday. And he said, quote, "It's like 4 in the morning, and I'm seriously waked up." And another woman noticed that this hum was in the morning when she was getting her kids ready for school. And the difference in the quality of saying that something is a hum versus a rumble, I don't exactly understand what we're dealing with.
Well, and it's got to be driving people crazy, Linda. Absolutely crazy. Great report. But up next, wait till you hear the next story. Missing scientist. Linda, what is this story?
In the Antarctic, of all places. Well, a year and a half ago, in January 2015, I received my first email from a retired 60-year-old U.S. Navy petty officer who is a first-class flight engineer, who asked me to only call him Brian. He entered the U.S. Navy in 1977, and he retired 20 years later in 1997. He and his C-130 crew encountered high strangeness in Antarctica from 1995 to 1996, several times. They all saw rapidly moving silver discs over the Transantarctic Mountains. Brian and his crew also saw a huge football field-sized hole in the ice, only about 5 to 10 miles from the geographic South Pole, that was supposed to be a no-fly zone. But during an emergency medevac crisis, to speed up their trip, they flew across the no-fly zone and saw apparently what they were not supposed to see, this huge hole in the ice, an entrance to an underground installation. That's the question. Later, at a camp near Marie Byrd Land, some dozen scientists, probably 15, and maybe 2 women and 13 men, disappeared for 2 weeks. When they reappeared, Brian's flight crew was assigned to pick them up, and all were silent and appeared scared. Brian and his C-130 crew received orders to not talk about the silver discs, not talk about the huge ice hole and the missing scared scientists. And repeatedly, the crew was sternly told that they did not see what they kept seeing. But Brian was never asked to sign an official non-disclosure agreement. So now that he is retired from the Navy while still working in civilian aerospace, Brian wanted to share what he has seen and experienced with me at Earth Files, because he is convinced that an alien presence is living and working on this planet. We had never met until Thursday evening, June 2nd, 2016, at the Contact in the Desert Conference in Joshua Tree, California. We organized to meet with his nephew, Kelly, and a friend to talk more about Brian's Antarctica experiences. We all went to a local Mexican restaurant in Joshua Tree, and after dinner, we kept talking until after midnight outside in the restaurant parking lot under trees. That weekend, Brian returned to his home in Phoenix, Arizona, and on Monday, June 6th, was back at his aerospace job while I was still at Contact. That morning, Brian received a surprising and disturbing phone call that he now describes.
Let's listen in.
And the voice on the other end of the line said, "Is this Brian?" And I said, "Yes." "Who's this?" Because I didn't recognize the number. It says, "I want to tell you that what you've been talking about, you need to stop talking about." And I said, "What stuff was that?" And he says, "We know that you were with Linda Howe on last Thursday night, and we know that you went to dinner at a Mexican restaurant in Joshua Tree, and we were aware of what you were talking about with her and other people, and that your experience that you had when you were on the ice in the service. We don't want you talking about that. Specifically, we don't want you talking about the scientist that you picked up after being missing for a couple of weeks." And I said, "How would you know about that? I've only talked to certain people." And the voice in the phone said, "Well, we know pretty much everything." And then they said, "Just don't be putting that out there anymore. Certain people would prefer that you not talk about that." And then I said, "Well, I'll consider that." And then the phone went dead. There was a click. Whoever on the other end hung up. I was like, wow, this is out of the blue.
What did you do next?
Well, I was kind of curious, so I took the number off my cell phone and Googled it on the Internet. It came back as the general phone number for the NSA.
The National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland.
Yes. And I called Kelly, my nephew, and he Googled it too.
Why would you get a threat specifically using my name now in June of 2016?
The only thing that I come up with is that report that's been going on the Internet of that British documentary team that was down there in Antarctica.
Right.
Something that was found under the ice. That team went missing, and they have not found those people since. Possibly that documentary team was in the same area where those scientists went missing for those 2 weeks, and that somebody doesn't want putting 2 and 2 together and going, well, you know, there's people down there that went missing for 2 weeks back in the 90s, and now these people are missing and haven't been found yet. Maybe there's a correlation there.
The British documentary footage that Brian is referring to was first reported in a March 18th, 2002 press release from the Atlantis Mapping Project in Washington, D.C. that began, quote, "The U.S. government said it will seek to block the airing of a video found by Navy rescuers in Antarctica that purportedly reveals that a massive archaeological dig is underway 2 miles beneath the ice," close quote. The video was allegedly the property of a Beverly Hills company called Atlantis TV that produced the Atlantis Mapping Project channel for the BBC in London until 2015, when it was closed down. The March 2002 release also said that the Atlantis TV crew had disappeared and that 2 U.S. Navy officers had found the missing production crew's videotape, quote, in an abandoned supply dump 100 miles west of Vostok Station, close quote. That would be near the South Pole. The press release said the video showed a pyramid and, quote, other spectacular ruins and things they could not go into, close quote. Allegedly, Navy SEALs came in 1 or more helicopters to take objects away. Officials of the U.S. Naval Support Task Force in Antarctica denied the story and said the Navy did not possess any video shot by the missing Atlantis TV crew. But at the same time, there was another U.S. legal action to block the release of a hardcover book entitled Raising Atlantis by Tom Grenius, a novel based on fact. The book is about a secret U.S. military expedition that discovers ancient ruins 2 miles beneath the ice in Antarctica. The government allowed the first ebook version in the spring of 2002 to be released containing sensitive information about U.S. underground installations. But the fall 2002 hardcover was blocked until the sensitive information was deleted. Could there be a link between that big ice hole that Brian and his C-130 Navy crew saw near the South Pole in 1995 and the missing National Science Foundation scientist in 1996 and the 2002 Atlantis Mapping Project news release about their missing documentary crew that allegedly videotaped a pyramid and other structures beneath the ice? If the U.S. government is trying to cover up the discovery of a pyramid and other structures 2 miles below the ice near the South Pole in Antarctica, the secret would be revolutionary, because the last time the entire Antarctica continent was free of ice might be 14 million years ago. So any advanced architecture on land beneath the ice would likely be that old as well. Brian, would you have ever suspected that we were being spied upon and listened to in both the restaurant and where we talked on the grass near the parking lot?
I would never have thought that. But now, my 20 years in the military, there are things that I saw that I really can't talk about that tells me and has shown to me that our government is capable of anything. Okay, so finding this out, that they knew that you and I and other people were where we were that night, it does not surprise me. With the work that you do, and as accurate as the information you find and as hard as you work to verify the truth of what you report on, I can imagine that you are watched quite a bit, you know?
We're supposed to be American citizens protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We are not doing anything that is wrong.
No, I don't think we are either.
And you were never asked in your service for the United States Navy to sign a non-disclosure agreement about any of those efforts in Antarctica, correct?
Yeah. At the time when I was in the service and those incidents happened, we were verbally told we couldn't say anything, to forget about it, but I never signed the non-disclosure of anything that I did while I was serving in the Navy.
In Antarctica?
In Antarctica, yes.
Now let's play an excerpt from our original January 30th interview.
Here's this huge hole in the ice.
Wow.
Almost like a cave entrance, but it was large enough that you could fly a C-130 into it, a hole that went down. We were told not to fly that area, but we continued our mission and picked up our medical emergency and turned around and had to come back to South Pole to refuel. And when we got close to that air sampling again, we were told, deviate this way so many miles and then turn back on course. Made our way back to McMurdo. And the entire crew was told to report to the skipper's office. We all got sat in this room, and this guy came in that nobody had seen before and said, okay, you guys saw this thing? You didn't see it.
And he means the big, deep hole.
Yes, big hole in the ice that was supposedly the air sampling station. We were told to not talk about it ever, and that area was considered off limits for research.
In your email to me, you wrote, talk among the flight crews was that there is a UFO base at the South Pole, and some of the crew heard talk from some of the scientists working at the pole of EBAs, an acronym for extraterrestrial biological entities, working with the scientists at their air sampling camp, which is the large hole in the ice.
Yeah. We're told not to talk among ourselves officially, but the guys, after a flight, you have a few beers, and it's like, yeah, I heard these scientists talking about that there's some guys there at Pole that were working with these strange-looking men. They weren't saying, alien or extraterrestrial, whatever, and that the air sampling station was actually a joint base with the scientists and the ETs.
In your email to me, you said, quote, none of the scientists would talk to any of the crew on the plane, and they looked scared.
That was a mission. It was probably a 2.5-hour flight from McMurdo in the middle of nowhere. We put this crew out there McMurdo had lost communication with. You're supposed to check in every so often by radio and tell McMurdo that everything's okay. So after they hadn't been heard of, we got sent back out there. Nobody around. All the equipment was still there, but the entire camp was gone. We called McMurdo on their radio to make sure that the radio was working, and we could hear McMurdo fine. A week later, supposedly these scientists had gotten back to camp, wanted to be picked up. And we went back in there. After we got airborne, I went back looking around, and these people's faces, they looked scared is what they looked. And I asked my loadmaster, where have these guys been? And he said, I don't know, I can't get any words out of them. Blank stares, and he offered them food and stuff, and like nobody would take anything. And so they get back to McMurdo and unload their gear. It was put in isolation. Kind of weird. Why is that stuff being isolated? With everybody talking in the camp, all the civilians, yeah, those guys went back to Christchurch, and they had a special flight for these guys. And nobody said anything.
Am I understanding correctly that each of the science groups that you guys flew in and out of the Antarctic base, they knew they were going to work with extraterrestrial biological entities down in that big hole?
What somebody had overheard was that there was an installation joint venture at Pole, not necessarily at the South Pole Station, but in the vicinity of South Pole. They were conducting some kind of project.
Between extraterrestrials and the human scientists.
Correct. It's like, man, what did these guys see? Why were they gone for 2 weeks that nobody knew where they were? It makes you wonder, is like, okay, so what is our government and other governments doing that we don't know about that's going on down there with visitors from somewhere else? And what possibly is still going on down there.
Hence the secrecy there, Linda.
Well, and I would like to reach out to all of our listeners everywhere if anyone has more information about the collaboration of American or other scientists with an alien presence underground in Antarctica, to please get in touch with me. I always honor requests for confidentiality, but I think there's something here that is so important, and there may be people out there who would like to whistleblow to some of us who are trying to get to the bottom of this. So please, if you can hard mail me, or you can email me some way, and then we could communicate in some separate way. My email address is earthfiles@earthfiles.com. Always remember and think about a reporter who files news about the Earth, earthfiles@earthfiles.com. And one of the reasons why I really think there's something serious in all this pattern of these puzzle pieces, one of the things that I tried to do about 5 or 6 months ago, I worked very hard trying to find the 2002 April ebook release of Raising Atlantis by Thomas Grenius.
Yeah.
This is the original, and according to the little bits of news that go back to 2002 from the Atlantis Mapping Project, this ebook, the government decided that nobody was going to read through 400 and some, it's a big book, 400 and some pages electronically, and then go through electronically and compare to a hard book that would come out in the fall a few months later. So they let slide that ebook. But the government did, this is a fact, there were legal actions to get out of the 2002 fall release, the hardback Atlanta Rising, and it was specifically focused around the National Programming Office's continuity of government plans for crisis like 9/11, a nuclear attack, EMP pulse, that there is a secret government operation that would take down underground. We're supposed to have 9 or a dozen gigantic underground installations where let's say a non-elected group, largely made up of people from NSA, CIA, DIA, military, they are the ones who would go down in some order that is in this continuity of government. And this is referred to in Raising Atlantis in terms of the archaeological discovery in the ice. I have been reading the ebook, and the reference is to a Section D that came up in another circumstance that the government got upset about. But nevertheless, we've been hearing about this since Cheney and Bush went underground during 9/11. And so continuity of government appears to be the sensitive area related to what is happening in Antarctica.
But why there? Linda, we're going to talk more about this with you during our Conversations with You segment in the last hour. But when we come back, something else is going on, the moon. Linda went out to investigate that. That's next. Linda Moulton Howe with us. Linda, I love stories about the moon. How did you uncover this one?
Well, it was on June 7th, 2016. That was not very long ago. The Albuquerque Journal in New Mexico, I live in Albuquerque, reported this, quote, former National Aeronautics and Space Administration or NASA consultant pilot Ken Johnston today says photos and films from Apollo missions were doctored, close quote, to paint out evidence of extraterrestrial structures and activities on the moon. To date, NASA has always denied manipulating images to hide ETs and UFOs. But the article also said that the Roswell Daily Record has announced that Dr. Ken Johnston, he has a 1980 theology doctorate from the Reformed Baptist Seminary in Denver, Colorado. That's why sometimes there is a doctor. He's actually a doctor of theology. He was announced that to Roswell that he is giving, and I think it's actually taken place, that he's given digital copies of 3 huge binders of original NASA photographs from the Apollo program to the International UFO Museum and Research Center down in Roswell. Well, 50 years ago, after 4 years in the Marines, and then in 1966, Ken Johnston began working as what he calls a human test engineer for Apollo mission efforts by the Grumman Aerospace Corporation, and that was in Clear Lake, Texas, near Houston. That's the region that would evolve into the NASA Johnson Space Center. But back then, it was the NASA Manned Space Center. And there he would put in some 3,000 hours manning the controls of the Grumman-produced lunar modules that were used in NASA astronaut training in Clear Lake. And that would evolve into more work that he would do off and on, as many people did, going from one position to another position in between and during various flight missions. So it was during the Apollo 14 flight that launched on January 31st, 1971, and returned to Earth on February 6, 1971, that Ken Johnston had a rude awakening from his NASA boss at the time. That was the famous Thornton Page, Ph.D. astronomer, astrophysicist, and member of the infamous Robertson panel from January 1953 that was organized by the Central Intelligence Agency to investigate UFOs and the implications for national security. Astronomer and astrophysicist Thornton Page, Ph.D., later told reporters that the panel members met informally together with no outsiders before that formal 4-day session known as the Robertson Panel on UFOs. So this means that Thornton Page, in 1953, George, was already involved in top-secret classified panel discussions about UFOs and aliens for the Robertson.
Way back then. Wow.
Yeah. So now, from 53 up to 1960s, we're in the Apollo program, and Thornton Page is playing a very important role in Clear Lake in Texas. Now, today, it is assumed that the Robertson panel was deliberately organized for a phony conclusion that UFOs did not present a direct threat to national security, and the panel did not find, quote, any evidence that related the object cited by people everywhere to, quote, unquote, space travelers. The CIA goal, and they organized the Robertson panel, was to deflect public and media attention away from the UFO phenomenon that our government has been deeply involved in, monitoring since World War II, back engineering extraterrestrial technology, and that has been described by many, many, many sources by now. But our government doesn't want anyone to know the truth. And it's just like painting out UFOs and technology on the moon's surface. Well, Ken Johnston lives in Berlin, just a little south of Albuquerque. So I contacted him, and on June 13th, I drove to his home and office to see his NASA photographs in those big binder and to learn more about his allegation that NASA doctored film and images during Apollo missions. Here now is retired NASA human test engineer Ken Johnston from Berlin, New Mexico.
Shortly after the Apollo 14 flight, Dr. Thornton Page, who was the director of the lunar geologists and scientists, contacted me and says, Ken, would you go to the photo lab and check out reel number such and such? I picked up the reel and made arrangements for a gun sequence camera projector. Now, for those people who don't know what a gun sequence camera is, if you've ever seen any movies where a jet airplane is chasing another and it looks like the shells are going off, that's a camera that takes a picture every time there's a shot. So I was to get the film and then get a gun sequence camera projector and set it up so that I could show it to Dr. Page and 6 or 7 of the other scientists that he had over next to Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center. I did exactly what he said. I set the program up for him, and we're viewing the view from the spacecraft as it's going around, the command module, as it's going around the moon on the back side of the moon, approaching crater Tsiolkovsky. The Russians named most of the craters on the backside of the moon, at least all of the big ones, because they got there first, as far as the robotic photographs were. But we're approaching the crater Tsiolkovsky, and the sun angle was such that about half of the crater was in shadow. And in the shadowed portion of the crater, there are 5 illuminated domes. And I describe it, if you'll take your hand and turn it palm up and bring all of your fingers together, you see 5 little bubbles there. Well, that's exactly what it looked like in the crater, was 5 bubbles. And they were illuminated from the inside.
Illuminated from the inside.
Correct. That's where the light was coming from.
Because they're in shadow, there is no sunlight on them, so anything has to be coming from inside.
Correct. And then one of them, it appeared it was like a column of steam that projected straight up. And Dr. Page had me freeze, he had me back up, he had me approach at one frame at a time, and then sometimes 2 or 3 frames at a time, the same we would do in analyzing a gun sequence camera projection. So he stopped, he says, okay, freeze. He turned to the other guys and says, well, boys, what do you think of that? And they all laughed as though it was an inside joke. He had to know which film, which reel, and exactly which one to ask for me to show to have me go and get it.
Dr. Thornton Page, whose position was?
He was the director of the Lunar Science Department in the OGM West mansion outside of the Johnson Space Center is where the astronomers and all the scientists that were there, he was the director of that department of NASA in Houston. And I didn't find out till probably 20 years later that Dr. Thornton Page was an advisor to the FBI. He was $1 a year man, and I just didn't know that at the time.
For our discussion today in June of 2016 and the emerging reality of all kinds of airbrushing, not just on the moon, but on Mars, and a manipulation of public and media perceptions about what orbits our Earth, the moon, what that red planet out there is and has been. The implication from Thornton Page, laughter when he said,
what do you think of that, boys?
He knew these 5 modules were there. He knew that there was something, we'll call it a non-human presence on the moon.
Okay. Now, Dr. Page told me, okay, go ahead and finish showing. So I finished the showing. This is about a 15-minute reel of 16-millimeter film. And I'm packing it up, and they're all over there laughing and talking, and I'm trying to listen. And Dr. Page says, go and take it back to the photo lab and turn it back in. When I got back to the Johnson Space Center's main photo lab, the front is a front desk, and you can order a particular picture, and it'll come to you. Or you can go in to do research in the inner sanctum room, review things in there with light tables. Or you can have a top secret clearance, which I had, and go in the back. And as I walked in, there's a light table, and it was about 3 foot by 4 foot with opaque top with lights illuminating from the bottom for making sketches or whatever. And there were 2 men and a woman there. I'm looking at them, they have 8 by 10 looks like negatives, and they're painting on them. And I asked them, what are you guys doing? And one of the guys says, oh, we're professional strippers. And the young lady says, well, no, actually what we're doing is we are stripping out, we're painting out along the horizon the stars and things that might be confusing to other people. That seemed a little strange. I had to go ahead and check that in. And then the next day I was to check out the same reel, take it to the main auditorium and show it to the rank and file. And this was all pre-planned. And I was so excited because I'm thinking, God, we have discovered the existence of aliens on the moon backside, and this is the film that's going to show everybody. And I'm in the auditorium, set it up, and I have my brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, who was one of the chief engineers at NASA there, sitting beside me in the projection booth. I said, watch it, what we found on Tchaikovsky. And as we're approaching the crater, there's the dark side in there, the same area, and it's totally black. There's no illumination, no lights. I stopped the camera. I told the audience, excuse me, we're having technical difficulties. I took the film out of the camera, and I ran it through my gloves, looking. All of the little tracks lined up, and there was no evidence that they had cut or spliced it. So within 24 hours, what they had to have done is taken that out, made an enlargement of it, fixed it, reduced it back to the side, made a copy of the original. So then I was showing one that had already been fixed. I finished the showing to the rest of the people, and they were excited because, oh, wow, they got to see the backside of the moon, and to them, that was all exciting. And I was devastated because I thought, my God, we're hiding this. I have to take the film back to the photo lab and check it back in, and I did that. And as I walked out over to the lunar laboratory, I ran into Dr. Page. He actually wore a patch over one eye. I said, Dr. Page, what happened to the lights and the domes we saw on the backside of the moon? He looked at me and he gave me a long wink. He says, there was never anything there.
The Tsiolkovsky crater has a 10,498-foot-high mountain that rises from the dark, flat crater floor beyond a large, seemingly empty section of the crater. However, it is at that far end of the emptiness, near the bottom of a steep crater wall, that a glow in the shadows can be detected in NASA Apollo 14 frame number AS 1475-10301, taken by a high-resolution Hasselblad camera as the astronauts headed back to Earth. That photograph is preserved in the NASA Lunar and Planetary Institute's Moon Photos Archive in Clear Lake, Texas, near Houston. You can also see that same photograph at earthfiles.com in an enlargement of that high-resolution frame that clearly shows a glow in the shadows of the Tsiolkovsky crater's furthest end away from the mountain. And you think that what we're looking at here, that this would be an alien base of these domes?
There's a reason why, and this because this is 1971. We were just barely getting to the moon and landing and being able to get back without, blowing ourselves up.
Let alone constructing what appears to be glowing objects.
Right. It had to be some extraterrestrial or non-Earth.
Has anybody said to you, since you've begun putting this out in the DVD, from NASA or from any agency, don't do this?
No, it's too late.
Did you ever sign a non-disclosure agreement?
Only back in 1966, when I first went to work at NASA, we signed a non-disclosure, same as a military. But I was never told, well, this is secret, you can't talk about it. In terms of anything that we did during the Apollo, because Apollo was supposed to be a publicly funded, open to the press operation so that we can do it publicly, whereas the Russians were trying to do it with their military, and we show that we were better than the best. It would appear that there would be more intelligent species on the moon capable of building bases like we've discovered in the photographs that I had in my archive. You would say, who's in charge of the moon?
Yeah, who is in charge?
Those that have the highest technology, not us.
So even the astronauts who knew they were taking photographs of technology, they were denied inside information.
The debriefing that takes place back during Gemini and Apollo was a good 7 days of constant debriefing from professionals, and there was a woman psychiatrist who was in charge of debriefing them, and in talking to other psychologists, they said there's evidence that they've been deprogrammed to not be able to talk about things that they saw. I think it's fascinating that Buzz Aldrin now, and I'm going to say he's come out of the closet, and he's talked about the light, craft that followed them, translunar insertion halfway to the moon. They were being followed. That he and Neil talked about, well, we can't go to mission control and say, is there a flying saucer out there, or an unidentified flying object, as he called it. He says, so we'll go and we'll ask what happened to the S-1B, the final launch vehicle that pushed them out of Earth orbit into the lunar coast. And when they did, it was silent for a while on mission control, and they came back and says, well, it's about so many thousand miles at this particular angle from you and everything else. And then, of course, Buzz says, well, we thanked them. But it was their way of saying there was something out there that had been following them. Now, he's come forward and said that it was a light. It got close enough. It had size and shape to it and followed them all the way to the moon. It is some kind of craft or something like that. And I've seen numerous pictures of the film around the moon as they would be filming like command module and moving real fast along the surface of the moon. And the other ones that I have in my archive, they're tracks coming down the side of a mountain and over along the bottom side of where it's smooth, and then branch going off the other way that look very much like caterpillar-type tracks or vehicles that have been moving along the lunar surface.
What a great story, Linda.
Well, this is, and George, here is a quote from Buzz Aldrin on July 29th, 2015, just about 1 year ago. And it's worth hearing in the sense that Ken Johnson is making a very important point that Neil Armstrong never said anything, and he died taking all these secrets that he had to the grave. And in the last year, Buzz Aldrin has been speaking out some, and here is a direct quote from an interview that he did with Atlantic Productions Limited a year ago. quote, even though we have always known of this possibility of aliens on the moon, the fact is that they, aliens, have ordered us to turn away from the moon. There are structures on the moon that are not ours. I can only say that their ships were superior to ours, both in size and technology. Wow, they are big and menacing, close quote. Buzz Aldrin, July 29th, 2015, and the last time he was on the moon was in July of 1969. And I think that we all should take those words very seriously and know that these astronauts have been either exposed quite a ways or just a tiny bit, and that it's true that Neil Armstrong, that the last video frames as the lander was coming down, and there was that sudden turn and all the dust, and you heard the NASA control say that there was a rock. And the truth, remember, it was just a month ago that I had on William Mills Tompkins, Navy engineer, said that he has seen with his own eyes the photograph of the 3 big silver discs on the edge of the crater. And he added the idea of 3 reptilian humanoids there, and I haven't found anybody who has seen that photo, but I have talked with a lot of people who said they have knowledge about the 3 large silver discs when Neil Armstrong's foot touched the surface of the moon. Something wanted the humans to know, we're already here, we own this place, and you're just visiting. And remember when Ken said the understanding was that, like Neil Armstrong and like Buzz Aldrin, somebody wanted us not to come back.
I've always heard that too, Linda. We'll be back with more on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Linda Moulton Howe with us with another great segment here. And again, we're back on the moon for this one, Linda?
That's right. It is another eyewitness to the NASA photo lab painting and airbrushing evidence of an alien presence in their images from the different astronaut missions on the moon. And her name is Donna Hare. She was born in Houston, Texas in 1945, is now 70. After graduating from Jesse Jones High School in 1965, she applied for work in what was then a really rapidly growing aerospace industry around the Apollo program. And in 1967, she was hired by Philco Ford Aerospace in Houston to work as a technical publications illustrator and designer. So this was off-site subcontractor work for NASA. And she did this for some 15 years, working on manuals for the astronauts. Eventually, she would also do freelance work in NASA's photo lab in what was called Building 8. That is where, twice, she was surprised to see first a female technician holding a negative of an alien object on the moon's surface from Apollo Mission 10. The NASA frame was AS-10-32-48-11, and the woman was painting out an unidentified object with a thick black ink-like substance on the negative. On another day, also in NASA's Building 8, she talked with a man who was airbrushing a white oval craft out of Earth's sky. Ken Johnson referenced me to Donna, and she agreed to speak on the record for Earth Files and Coast. At NASA in the 1960s, she said, photo lab techs were always talking about the rumors of aliens and UFOs on the moon. Here now from Austin, Texas, is Donna Hare.
People in the know all told me, off-site especially, there is a cover-up. They'll tell me, we can't talk about it. There's so many things. Either tell them they can't get their retirements, or they can't do this, or they can't do that, or they're not patriotic, or they've signed papers of non-disclosure, or this could cause panic. There's so many reasons that they give these people not to talk. Now, for me, the reason I talk, I was never debriefed not to talk about UFOs because they didn't expect me to see them. Because where I worked was in the Philco building off-site and occasionally would work on-site in Building 8. So I basically slipped through the cracks. Where I worked, it was in the photo lab. And where I've seen the pictures being opaqued out, or the negatives worked on, I've had 2 experiences of seeing a UFO or advanced technology being covered up. I witnessed it. But I never did physically do it. I never did that. The one time that I worked, I'm sure, on the Department of Defense work, I and 3 other people in a room where only 4 drafting tables fit in there, were guards at the door. We couldn't take paper in and out.
Which facility?
I'm at the main Philco Ford building, off-site at JSC. We were one of the contractors for NASA.
And this was Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Right, but we weren't allowed to know what that job was for. It was so secret. I mean, I drew wiring schematics and put numbers in it, and I have no clue what the wiring looks like, really. It was for manuals for the Department of Defense.
Do you mean that it was so compartmentalized that you could be working on sections that were going into some sort of an instruction book, but you wouldn't have any idea about what because it was so segmented and compartmentalized?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And the things that I found out were accidental. The first incident that happened, I was over in Building 8, which is the photo lab. During downtime in Building 8, I wanted to learn how to airbrush in Building 8. I had a small lab. I went down to the lab next to me, and I found out that the lady in there was an older woman doing the airbrushing. Well, she was sitting at the drafting table. I told her what I was wanting to do is learn what she was doing, if that was possible, and she was very nice. She had a negative of the moon's surface with this bar. She was taking a snub-nosed paintbrush, and the opaque is a very thick ink-like. It's not ink in the sense that it's black, but it's very thick for the negatives. And she was going around in a circle, covering this object up on the moon. There was nothing around it except this object, and she pulled her arm down to let me see it. I realized it was a foreign object on the moon. The lady was taking out an object on the moon on a negative.
So was she painting on the negative?
Yes, she was painting on the negative.
Donna, what did this foreign object look like in detail?
Well, the part I saw being covered up was a bar that was like a curved bar. And Ken has sent me a picture since then. It's the object I saw being covered up. I walked out of there thinking about it, and not too long after that, I went across the hallway because that's where they would process film from the moon. I went over there, and the next gentleman that was in Building 8, across from me, he was working on what is called a mosaic. It was just a huge mosaic of about, I guess they're like 12-inch pictures square that are put together to form a larger picture. Now, I'm sure this was for an outside vendor, probably not NASA. It was during downtime, and I was looking at the black and white photograph, and it was very clear, an aerial. I don't know if it was a satellite or if it was a low-flying plane, but it was very detailed. I was really up close at the table looking down, and the gentleman drew my attention to one of the pictures, and he said, "Look at that." And I said, "Oh, is that a bubble on the emulsion?" Because it's a round white disc-like thing. He says, "Bubbles on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground." And I looked again, and I looked at him, and I said, "Is that a UFO?" And he said, "I can't tell you that." And he's grinning. And so he didn't say no. He didn't say yes or I don't know. He said, "I can't tell you that it's a UFO." And so I looked at him and I said, "What are you going to do with this piece of information?" Because up until then, I always thought, okay, aliens are probably keeping it secret from us. They're coming here. But I never would have guessed we were keeping it secret, too.
Right.
I mean, this was a rude awakening for me that we're keeping it secret because this is a piece of information that's awesome. And he says, "Well, we have to airbrush them out before we sell these to the public." So they had a protocol in place. They do this a lot.
Yeah, what were they taking the photograph on the Earth of the white UFO casting a shadow with?
It was either a satellite picture or a high-flying biplane. I'm not sure which it was.
It was above clouds, and there was a break in the clouds, and you could see a white, round aerial object casting a shadow.
Right. So these things supposedly go everywhere. They're not, like, restricted.
Did you see the man who was showing you this image paint out the white UFO?
No. With photographs, that's a little different. When you're fixing a negative, it's black and clear. So it's a different method of covering up. Now, photographs, you can match the paint and airbrush out the picture of the mosaic. It's already a photograph. I was interested in finding out more about it, and boy, everything that I heard is rumor. Different people would come and say, did you know that they found a structure on the dark side of the moon? And I said, really? And yeah, there was aliens sitting there. And these were people that worked in higher communications and systems and things that would really know about this stuff. And there's a vast majority of people that work there that never knew. So it's very compartmentalized. That's how they keep it secret.
What kind of aliens did they rumor about being photographed on the backside of the moon?
They talked mainly about craft being there.
What craft that people described seeing?
Round, circular craft.
Color?
Well, I think they were metal, shiny metal ones. I think there was 3 of them. 3 circular, sitting by a crater. I'm watching them.
Which mission?
Well, at least Apollo 11, I'm sure of. I was told that some of the communications that was given at the time was they did the code word, Santa Claus, they switched off and went to a different way of talking, which I think was ham radio. I'm not sure. I think some ham operators got the real scoop on the conversations, but they talked about how the craft were sitting on one side watching us land on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
When they say they, I don't know where these beings are coming from. I'm sure if they have the technology to travel even in our solar system, they may be coming from really far away.
Or they've been based in this solar system on the moon and the Earth for millions of years. And did you ever hear anybody say that there were standing up reptilians on the moon that were photographed by NASA?
No, I never heard that. But that doesn't mean it's not true. It is pretty unbelievable, some of the stuff that's being covered up. Now, I did know some of the techs that worked in the lab that were part of the cover. And what they told me, this is the story they gave them on the lab. We were in Cold War with Russia, I believe it was, and that these objects, they don't know what they are, but please keep these things secret because it could be secret weaponry from Russia. So please don't talk about these objects that are coming up on the photographs. Now, some of the people weren't that gullible, and some of them pretty much let me know they knew they were UFOs. But all of them couldn't talk about it, and they were very afraid to talk about it.
Did you ask anybody straight, are we talking about aliens, ETs, that are not human?
Well, all I can say is they're talking about craft that are not from around here. They're not ours. I'm saying I'm sure they're extraterrestrial, because if we took years to go to the moon with rockets, and they're zipping around, going back and forth around in space to the moon, and God only knows where else. It's got to be advanced technology that we don't have yet.
After Apollo 11, were there any more rumors about silver discs being seen by astronauts or anything else, front or back or poles or anything on the moon?
Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them had experiences seeing things, and they were told that they couldn't talk about it.
You yourself never used any kind of a paintbrush or airbrush to affect photographs, to edit them out yourself, but you knew of 2 different people that you've described, one changing a negative and getting a craft out of a lunar image. The other person, it was Earth, and it was a white UFO casting a shadow.
And this craft or this circle disc was really close to the top of the trees. I'd say because it was casting a shadow at the same angle as the trees were. So I would say that this craft was really close to the ground, out of radar reach.
Mm-hmm.
I was told the pictures were going to be airbrushed, and I saw the negative being covered up. His picture was definitely the one that he sent me a copy of, was being touched up at NASA in the photo lab. I don't know if it was a craft, but it looked like a bar coming up from a round bell-shaped thing. So it's what I saw being covered up.
Great story, Linda.
Well, I hope that you and everybody listening can go to my Earth Files headlines page, where I have a cropped close-up on this object that was created by a fellow at Arizona State University. And this is what Donna Hare has identified. Tomorrow I'll also have a large in-depth report on this with some more material that I will be getting tomorrow. That's why the delay in the full report. But I did place this on headlines because I wanted to point out to you, if you can look at this, the shape is like butterfly wings.
It does look like butterfly wings.
Yeah.
I thought of that.
The big important thing is underneath each wing, look at that light that is there. There's clearly photon energy is being directed from each, we'll call them wing, down onto the ground. Do you see those two patches of
maybe, is it a little drone, maybe?
Well, what we don't know is size. But this is definitely something that appears to be artificial. It's casting light. It's doing something. And then if you consider what she is saying, that she watched a black ink be put on a negative to blot this out. When you deal with negatives, where it would be black, it would print white. Where it was white, it would print black. So either there was a decision that they wanted to simply enhance the white and cover it up with white as opposed to black so that it might be less observable of somebody who went down to look at this. And since this opposite, you have to put that in your mind, here is another thing that I've talked with Ken Johnston about, that they would actually go so far at NASA to, let's say, affect the Hasselblad negative, muck it up some way for whatever it was that they wanted to hide. Then they would make what's called a positive transparency. Then this would be the opposite, and the white might go black. Whatever it was that they wanted to do, that positive transparency would then become the source of the prints, not the original Hasselblad negatives. It would be the positive transparency. And those prints, you would never be able to tell what had happened. You would not know. It was like Ken being so shocked with Thornton Page that he had seen the object in the crater, and that what they had done so skillfully was to create a film that would run, and he went through that process they would have had to do to make it seamless and there would be no splicing. Well, the same thing on this. And what I'm trying to do now is to find out if this is an original photo that Ken had because of his work inside of NASA, and his job was to archive photos. This may have been from the original Hasselblad, and then the prints thereafter that went out into the public might have been made from a positive transparency.
That's right.
And that is very interesting to me for people listening. If anybody knows about this, has any photos that resemble this that would be after the opaquing, I sure hope you will get in touch with me at earthfiles at earthfiles.com. All of this, George, is increasing this year of 2016 with more and more whistleblowers, and there is one more reminder that back in 1995 there was a military whistleblower even then, and he said that he saw NASA photos being altered to erase anomalies on the moon's surface which were filmed from the lunar orbiter, and he was asked to visit an area of Langley Air Force Base where he viewed 35-millimeter film images being processed by National Security Agency agents. He claims that he saw 35-millimeter strips of film which were spliced together to make 18.5-inch by 11-inch mosaics of the lunar surface for release to the general public, but an officer told him that there was a moon base on the dark side of the moon and that it was their job, NSA/NASA, to erase them out.
Unbelievable. Have you ever interviewed Buzz Aldrin?
I have not talked with Buzz Aldrin, but when I was executive producer or working as on the Sightings film in L.A., the pilot for that series, we interviewed half a dozen of the different astronauts from Gordon Cooper to others,
Ed
and
Mitchell.
we heard about all kinds of things that they saw. Excuse my voice.
Yeah, we're going to take the break. So you rest the voice up for the final hour of Conversations with Linda. I do want to talk with you about Buzz Aldrin again when we come back. One of our favorite times, Conversations with Linda. Questions, stories, whatever, jump on board as we come right back. Welcome back to Coast. Linda Moulton Howe with us. Linda, you will not be with us next month. You've got some great news, don't you?
My daughter is getting married in Philadelphia, and July is going to be a month of festivities before, during, and after, and it's a really joyous time, and it is kind of one of those special moments, and especially on this planet that seems so agitated and precarious and dangerous every day. And so we are going to try, I guess, to put ourselves in a bubble for the month of July and try to be happy and joyful, because it is a wonderful time. And what I started to say before the break, ever since the dog fire is what they called it up in the Manzanos, started about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago here.
Right.
And it was then joined by smoke that was coming in from California. We were getting all kinds of messages from the weather people and others about the newspaper. Well, I and a whole lot of people I know, we began coughing, sneezing. Whatever comes in with these fires sometimes, you just wonder, what is it that is burning, in this case, west of us or east of us, both, and combines and comes in, and nobody knows for certain what they are breathing. That is another one of the big unknowns today, is that stuff can be carried with some of these fires that seem to be getting bigger and worse, that can make humans and animals sick.
Linda, I had an opportunity to interview Buzz Aldrin for just a little bit, and he was talking about how he used a Bic pen to get off the surface of the moon because he had to push it down on the switch. He couldn't fit his glove down there.
Oh, my God.
But I also was on with him with Larry King years ago on the Larry King Show, and he really never talked about UFOs. Has he changed his tune?
Yeah, just in the last year. And that's what Ken Johnson meant about he was glad to see Buzz Aldrin coming out of the closet.
Is he serious, or is he trying to pull our legs?
Oh, no, it's extremely serious. There are so much that I have heard. I think for me personally, the most dramatic discussion that I ever had about Apollo 11 was with a jet pilot who had grown up with Neil Armstrong when they were teenagers to their early 20s, and they both had become pilots. And I was supervising producer on the pilot for the Sighting series, working in Los Angeles for about 5 months. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to interview as many astronauts as we could. And at the top of my list as the producer was Neil Armstrong.
Even though he hated being interviewed, didn't he?
And why did he hate being interviewed? This is where this story comes in. So it was recommended that I get in touch with this man who had been a colleague of Neil's for so long, and people have bonds from high school and 20s that can last for a lifetime. And so I was able to get a dinner meeting with this pilot, and this is what he told me. He said that after Apollo 11 crew got back, after the July 69 first step on the moon, eventually he made contact with Neil Armstrong, and that he could tell in Neil's voice that something was off. And he ended up going over to the house. And here you would think in 69, after July, that Neil Armstrong would be joyous, that he would have photographs of all the stuff they did on the moon.
Oh, my God, it's exciting.
The landing, and that it would be a big deal, right?
And life-changing, and epiphany, everything.
You would think. And the pilot said in the house there was not one photograph. Not one photograph.
I find that weird.
Armstrong involved with anything having to do with the Apollo 11. And he said, Neil, what is wrong? And Neil said, and he said the voice dropped, and like they're really buddies. And he said, we were coming down, and there were these 3 big silver discs, and they were waiting for us and watching us. And the way the pilot told me is that Neil Armstrong was angry. The implication was, no matter what they had been debriefed, whether or not NASA knew or expected that there would be anything like that, the very fact that it occurred and our government had knowledge. Our government has had knowledge about an alien presence on this planet since at least World War II. This is 1969. These guys are being trained to go into space. They're being trained to go around the moon, and in this case, to land on the moon. And if somebody didn't sit them down and really talk to them about the complex nature, as William Mills Tompkins and others are increasingly whistleblowing about, the complexity of multiple intelligences involved in this solar system, with this Earth, with our history, with genetic evolution, the whole 9 yards, then seeing 3 big silver discs on the crater edge would perhaps have been a shock to their system, even if momentarily. And I think that comment that Ken Johnston made about a psychiatrist who was debriefing each one of the crews for days, for weeks when they came back, and raising the question, were they programmed in some way to forget? And if so, would that help explain that Neil Armstrong was conditioned not to talk, but on top of all of that, that he perhaps felt a certain kind of disconnect and maybe even anger over the fact that here we were pretending NASA as a public agency that was supposed to be encouraging students and teachers and everything, but that in fact that it was schizophrenic with one face to the public, but a huge part that was allied with the CIA and the NSA, having to deal with an alien presence on Earth, on the moon, and throughout the solar system and beyond, and that would really get to you if you were training to go into space and then have 3 big silver discs waiting for you on the moon. And that apparently is the main reason, according to the pilot, that Neil Armstrong stayed silent for the rest of his life.
He was married twice, and both of his wives, I don't know if they're still alive or not, but wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
To talk to this, let's see, he was married to Janet Sheeran when he landed on the moon. You need to find out for us if she's still alive, and if you could interview her, because I'm sure he told his wife something about what he saw on the moon. I don't know if anybody's ever interviewed her.
Well, and William Mills Tompkins describes it in detail and says he saw the photos, that there were photos, the running camera, the same thing that we just heard from Ken Johnson and from Donna Hare in terms of all the photographs and the images and the film, and that William Mills Tompkins says that he saw the photograph of the big 3 silver disc with his own eyes on the crater.
And he had 3 children by her, and so maybe they will talk too.
Well, it's definitely worth trying.
Oh, my God, what a great interview that would be.
Don't you begin to get the feeling, George, that the whole planet is beginning to wake up inside of a Star Trek episode, but the truth is it's all real. All of it, good and bad, non-humans, as Lynn Buchanan has remote viewed. Just like William Mills Tompkins says, that there are the marauders, controllers versus more spiritual and positive ones, that there really are Star Wars, there's galactic trade, and we have been forced into such, we'll say, suppressed knowledge for so long as a civilization that it is becoming amazing that all of the so-called fiction based on fact that we've been exposed to since the day the Earth stood still has been like drops leading up to this part of the century, where we may finally start getting all of the truth beyond whistleblowers from our own government. They have to tell us the truth. We should be demanding that we be told the truth.
Yeah. Well, turn you loose on this to be sure. By the way, he got involved in a legal dispute with his barber because the barber sold locks of his hair.
Neil Armstrong's hair?
Yeah, for $3,000 a pop or something.
Oh, my gosh.
Unbelievable. Let's go to the phones for you, Linda. We'll go to Thomas in La Jolla, California to get things started. Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call, George. I really appreciate it.
You're
and
very
Linda,
welcome.
I just truly appreciate it. I'm sure the Coast audience appreciates your top-shelf investigative journalism, and we're truly grateful.
Thank you so much.
My question for you, Linda, is it's just fascinating what you have to report about the lunar photographs, etc. Do the Russian and Chinese space agencies, have there been any whistleblowers? I mean, the Russians were the first to film the backside of the moon.
That's right, and they named those big craters.
Right, absolutely. And then, of course, the Chinese now, they have the lunar rover on the moon. There has to be some sort of chatter, so to speak, within the Russian and Chinese professionals, concerning photographs, concerning the alien presence.
Well, the most fascinating discussion I have had about China, for example, and what do they know, what do other countries know, was with Scott Jones, and he was the Navy intel guy that Senator Pell hired in the mid-'70s to go to China officially. It was all authorized by the State Department, had all the papers, and Scott did an interview with me about 10 years ago telling the whole story, and that what Senator Pell wanted Scott Jones to do was to find out as much as possible about what the Chinese had in photographs, film, documents, and so forth related to UFOs and ETs. And how they introduced all of this, I'm not certain, but Scott said it was all prepared and he had Chinese government handlers. And after being there for about 2 weeks, he said, Linda, I saw everything we all want to see. He said there are photographs, there's film, they have craft, they have bodies, they have everything. And that at the end, before he left, he asked through his translator to the political representative, you have everything the world wants to know. Why are you not making what you have public? And that the Chinese political person bowed with their hands together. And when he stood back up, the translator said these words to Scott Jones from the United States. We are waiting for the United States to act. Well, then Scott and I had a very interesting discussion. Could that mean that when Richard Nixon, as president, broke the ice going to China, was it really a cover trip to talk with the Chinese through translators about precisely that the United States may have made an agreement with Mao to keep everything to the Chinese, letting the United States continue to be the kind of major organizer and strategizer about the extraterrestrial presences, and that there was an agreement, a silent agreement, maybe a secret executive agreement, and that we are still living the legacy of these discussions and these, executive signed and non-disclosed agreements that might have been made about keeping the United States as the one that everybody is waiting for to open it all up, but the other countries, such as China, Scott Jones says they've got everything. And today, in 2016, why are the Chinese not acting independently?
Let's go to Skip now in Warren, Ohio. Welcome to the show, Skip.
How you doing?
Good.
Thank you for taking my call. Linda, I want to mention something that I mentioned to George earlier. You mentioned a pyramid at the South Pole. Well, I was listening to a ham radio operator on a scanner discuss something that they were discussing. It sounded like an Art Bell show, so I listened, and they were talking about HARP, and they talked about also abductions, and the really one that got my attention was the fact that one of the guys asked, do you think we'll ever time travel? And one of the guys piped up, said, I retired from the Navy a month ago, but 3 months before I retired, he says that I'm also bound by my security clearance. He says, so I'm going to tell you what I can and nothing more, so don't ask me no questions. Everybody agreed, and he said, I was in a pyramid that had never been opened before, 3 months before I retired. He said, also, he says, in that pyramid we found a 4,000-year-old contemporary computer.
Ah.
A 4,000-year-old contemporary computer.
Probably runs better than ours do right now.
And what your implication is that that there was an overlay in time of something from the future here?
No, I think that, you can't, they say you can't go back in time, and I believe that.
Well, no. I mean, no. Mathematically and theoretically, going back in time is very feasible in the space-time continuum of this universe.
Right, you can do it, but you have to have a machine that was turned on. Like today, if we turned on a machine, we would be able to go forward as far as the point where it was turned off. So if you want to go back, you have to have access to a machine that had been turned off back to where you want to go.
That's an interesting take. Linda, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with much more conversations with Linda. Those of you who have been on hold, just hang there. We'll get to you as well. Linda Moulton Howe. And again, our website, earthfiles.com, is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. As for us, don't forget to like us on Facebook if you would, and follow us on Twitter. You can do all that by going to coasttocoastam.com, far right-hand corner. We'll be back. Welcome back. Linda Moulton Howe with us. Linda, any other trips coming up for you other than the Philadelphia wedding?
When I get back in August, I'm going to be speaking in Phoenix at Phoenix MUFON. Then I have a couple of more trips, and that gets me into September. And it's like a whole bunch of stuff starts happening in September, October, November.
Gosh.
Have you ever felt like that in this world now, I don't know if it's the digital influence or what it is, but simply finding quiet hours to read, which is so important to do to actually understand things, is becoming more and more difficult.
What about time, Linda? Isn't this a fast year? Why does it seem so fast?
Well, I am not sure myself, but each year we say the same thing. It seems like each year is getting faster and faster,
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to be age dependent. I know people in their 30s, their 20s, they're saying the same thing, that they feel like, one friend of mine said the other day, she feels like the old visual of a hamster running in a cage, and it's going around faster and faster, the faster the hamster runs, but the hamster can't get out.
Well, you know, my oldest granddaughter just turned 22, and it just seems like yesterday she was running around in diapers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
Everything is
just
seemingly
so fast.
Yeah, there's just so much all the time. And sleep becomes like this necessary interruption.
I'm going on 14 years doing Coast to Coast. Can you imagine that?
Well, 2004.
2003 I started in January, so we're going to go for 14 next January. I mean, where does the time go?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, because I've been working with you ever since in Philadelphia when you took over for Art.
Well, you know what? My executive producer, Lisa, sent me a note a couple days ago, and she said, do you know that you now have been doing Coast to Coast on a syndicated basis longer than Art did? And I went, you got to be kidding me. She said,
wow.
She said, no.
Well, that's true, because Coast started, I think, in 1995. We had been doing Dreamland on weekends, and then Coast started. So if it started in 95, then 2005 would have been 10 years, and he left.
He left in 2003. Yeah. Amazing. Oh, well, let's go to some final calls here for you. We go west. Brock is in the state of Washington. Brock, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, Linda.
Hi.
I called you guys about earlier in the year when you were on the show, Linda, and it was about traveling in outer space, and you said somebody was working on something where you could go the quarter the speed of light.
Right, that is what they call.
Linda, I don't know if you remember.
Yes, they're called wafer craft, and they're being designed and developed by several different academics and companies. And the idea is that you would use lasers and have the photons push lightweight and small wafer. That's why they call them wafer craft, and that the brains in the wafer craft would be like an iPhone. An iPhone is really quite a sophisticated computer, and something about the size and the complexity of an iPhone could be the brains in this small wafer. And once they turn on the laser beam on the wafer craft, in 3 minutes, depending upon whether they reach 25% or 30% the speed of light, in 3 minutes, the wafer craft could be whizzing by Mars. That's how fast they could go.
That's amazing. I love technology stories, don't you?
And it's just, this is part of that feeling like waking up in the middle of a Star Trek. It's coming so fast. Our government must have amazing things that they're keeping away from terrestrial enemies, but that we are, George, when Lynn Buchanan says that he knows somebody inside the government who is managing galactic trade between Earth and aliens, it's like we all need to catch up.
I mean, it's amazing. I'm not sure I believe everything, but there are amazing stories out there.
From Joe McMoneagle to Lynn Buchanan and others, they've remote viewed, and I think they are remote viewing facts. I really do. We talked to a lot of them. Jim Mars and I, for sure, have talked with a lot of them.
Elaine is in Fort Myers, Florida. Good morning, Elaine.
Hi, good morning, Linda and George.
Hi.
It's a very simple comment from everything you're saying, and everything we are listening to. It's just so obvious that everybody's waiting for some big reveal and announcement and all that, and that's really, they already have. Whoever they are, aliens, interdimensional, or whoever they all are, they all the stuff is here. It's our fault that they're
definitely
keeping it from ourselves.
Us talk more and more and more, meaning that it is not something that came in swooping and destroying. It has been a cat and mouse game that has kept humans intrigued and trying to understand for a long time, and now it is coming in waves hitting the beach. And I think that when the intensity of the energy is this much, and every day there's more and more coming, it has to be that we are building up to perhaps a collaboration between one of the alien types and our government and other governments, that they know they cannot keep all these fingers in the holes in the dike that they've been trying to. Today, I received a photograph that is being studied by a colleague, and I hope to be doing a story about this. And honest to God, George, it is without doubt such an obvious painting of a sand dune on Mars that you just kind of say, this is either stupid or a mistake. And if it's not stupid and a mistake, it is somebody that wants to see if the public will see this corny, flat. It doesn't even pretend to look like a modeled sand dune. It just looks like a flat wave that's been placed on a section of Mars. It's that obvious. And is that what would be happening inside now today, where there are people who are responsible for airbrushing out alien stuff on Mars and the Moon and Ceres and so forth throughout the solar system? Are they becoming so frustrated that they're now trying to get pictures out to see if images will start talk because they are so obvious?
We now have Jason in Texas, first-time caller. Jason, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
How are you doing?
Good, Jason. Thank you.
How are you doing, ma'am?
Hi.
I just wanted to touch base with y'all and ask y'all if y'all have ever heard of Carol Watts and any encounter that he had over Wellington, Texas in 1967.
No.
That you've never heard of that story?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just curious if anybody...
Can you just give a short summary? Was it an abduction? What happened?
Well, what happened was he had basically been coming from his dad's, it happened south of Wellington, Texas in 1967. He was coming from his dad's farm going to his house, and he had thought somebody was prowling around their barn. But the story tells like this. It says, I was traveling on, It's saying I was traveling south on US 83 at 10, well, no, this ain't it. Anyway, the bottom line of the story is that the guy said that he saw a craft that was 100 foot long and
like a cylinder, I think, if I recall that story. And didn't he have incredible publicity to the point, Jason, where it almost ruined his family?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I remember that case.
Yeah, yes, sir.
George? It was a low-flying cylinder?
Yes, and there were a couple sightings of this thing out there in that Wellington, Texas area, and he even got to a point, Carol Watts, and it's a guy, he got to the point where because he was trying to explain what had happened to him, he got involved in some kind of hoax confession that came back and bit him in the tail, too. Wasn't that what happened to him, Jason?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Carol Watts disclosed the reason behind the false hoax confession. If you want to read about it, you can just, pull up a story, UFO.
And Carol Watts. Well,
yeah,
it sounds
it's a great story.
This is one of those, again, where something real happens, and then people become overwhelmed by either having to defend themselves or whatever it is, and then they go too far, and then they have a hoax claim, and once there's a hoax claim, that's it. It
gets
knocked off the books. It's not fair, but it happens all the time. And the government understands this. Counterintelligence understands this. That to keep knocking the pins off, it's so easy if they put something out that discredits the person, discredits the time, discredits the date, whatever it is, and they are skilled chess players on the cases where they do not want the public and the media to take something seriously. Counter intel is extremely sophisticated in the so-called deflection through hoax claims. So I myself am always suspicious when there is a obvious hoax claim, because underneath is probably something real.
That's a good point. I remember there was a case in Michigan. I must have been 17 when J. Allen Hynek came to town, and he got hit with the swamp gas thing.
Oh,
remember that one?
Oh gosh, yes. And he told me in that year before he died that it was one of his biggest regrets.
Yes.
And that he wanted so much to be vindicated in his life. He didn't know at the time that he was dying of a brain tumor that had spread apparently from prostate cancer. But he wanted to be vindicated, and in his huge passionate desire to be vindicated, he was basically telling me and his friend Richard Sigismund that he knew for a fact there were craft, there were aliens, extraterrestrials. Why would an astronomer who had been at Northwestern and Ohio State leave his prestigious career and found centers for UFO studies if he hadn't been exposed to the reality of all of this, George? Alan knew.
He knew.
Alan knew it was all real and it's serious, and he was hoping it would come out in his lifetime. For this to be 2016 and still covered under these layers of policies of denial is absurd.
And the flip-flop he did, going from an apparent non-believer to a staunch believer, was absolutely riveting.
Well, it isn't belief. It's based on hard data.
Yeah.
If you had walked in my shoes through all of the animal mutilations I have investigated...
No, I'm not wearing high heels. Not going to happen.
No, it's not high heels. It's boots. Going out into pastures where you then end up with veterinarians and with law enforcement, and they're telling you and showing you where a heart has been removed, and they're talking about molecular surgery. You are not in the land of terrestrial medicine.
Let's go to Dylan in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, east of the Rockies. Hey, Dylan, go ahead.
Hey, George. Hey, Linda.
Hi.
I just wanted to, Linda, get your opinion on the something that's kind of been a buzz lately on the internet, which is basically this idea that, they're lying about, the space, like the NASA and everything, a lot of that.
About everything.
Lies. Yeah, and but specifically, there's a book which is an account of by a guy named Olaf Janssen.
Yes.
His trip to Antarctica in supposedly 1811, and then also the books by Admiral Richard E. Byrd,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk a lot about the inner Earth and Antarctica, or particularly the North Pole, and the fact that there's another civilization up there, basically, that's like 1,000 years more advanced than us, and that a lot of what the NASA is telling us is actually aliens from outer space. It's actually local to Earth, and they're here.
Well, that's the phrase, alien presence. Goes back to John F. Kennedy. This is the story that I did last year at Earth Files and Coast, having to do with Caddy, who was the attorney who got the Watergate burglars out that night. And Caddy was a friend of E. Howard Hunt's. And Daniel List of Dark Journalists and I did a long program about all of this. And Caddy did an interview with Daniel List. And then I was using it at Earth Files and on Coast, in which he said that E. Howard Hunt told him before E. Howard Hunt died that the reason that John F. Kennedy was assassinated was because he wanted to open up, meaning go public, with the alien presence on the Earth, and that was the phrase they were using in the 60s.
Wow. And we heard that Marilyn Monroe got killed because of the same thing.
Exactly, and I think that's absolutely true. And we have to get past this. Nobody should be dying because governments have policies of 1984 Orwellian, upside-down, backwards, that we're still alone in the universe. Oh, come on. We should be the entire human family should be embracing the fact we're not alone in the universe. It's very complex, and that the alien presence on this planet goes right to the heart of these huge caverns that William Mills Tompkins said that the government discovered in World War II all over the planet, and they have always been bases for various kinds of alien presences coming and going, and that part of the drama of the Earth and the relationship to all of this, we'll call it the galactic theater of what we're living in this universe, is that Atlantis and Lemuria and Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki, all of it, the Greeks, they weren't gods. None of them were gods.
No, they weren't. Linda, enjoy Philadelphia. Enjoy the wedding. We'll talk to you in August.